who was Sigmund Freud?
Sigmund Freud was arguably one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, as he renewed a field of study long overdue and led men to modern-day thinking on psychology. He allowed people to begin seeing mental health in a better light. He even brought about change to treatments so patients would not have to suffer through medical procedures. What he did is he introduced what is known as the talking cure. Freud would listen to his patients talk and help them revisit their repressed memories. By doing so, a patient could be freed from their self-agony. This revolutionary concept of the talking cure would serve as Freud's turning point in history. Freud's biggest hope was for his patients to one day reordain themselves back into their functioning societies. He may have had many controversial ideas, but nonetheless, his theories changed psychology forever with the introduction of psychoanalysis. Now let's take a look into a humble man's beginnings and how he became the person we know him as today.
Sigmund Freud was born in Freiburg, Moravia in 1856 and was the oldest out of his 7 siblings. For most of his life, he lived in Vienna, Austria with his family when they first moved there in 1860. He attended a preparatory school and was very high-achieving in many of his classes, including science and mathematics. With his academic remarks, he allowed himself success and was accepted into the University of Vienna when he was only 17. He studied philosophy and neurology, later obtaining his medical degree and PhD in neurology. After Freud graduated from his university, he worked at the Vienna General Hospital alongside one of his friends, Joseph Breuer. They both helped treat hysteria through hypnosis, and then, in 1885, Freud ventured off to Paris as a student. Once he came back, he opened up a private practice facility specializing in helping those with nervous disorders, and to pursue his profession of being a neurologist. This is the start where Sigmund Freud would be recognized in history.
Freud's ideas brought a peace of mind other therapies didn't offer. He felt the need to cure his patients, bringing lots of hope to such a dark area in psychology. Freud found that by talking with his patients, he helped them with their traumatic experiences and gave meaning to them. Unfortunately, before Freud, mental illness was viewed in a very negative light. It wasn't considered normal, and people who acted abnormally were frowned upon and avoided. In a Darwinian perspective, it was believed that since we evolved from mammals, we are truly animals trying to make sense of a civilized society. From a religious perspective, it was believed that people with mental illness were cursed by God and possessed by the devil. If you were perceived as anything other than the norm, you would be treated inhumanely because of the fear of the unknown. These patients were often burned at stake due to convictions of being witches, thrown into penitentiaries, and oftentimes were sent to psychiatric hospitals where they underwent horrible surgical procedures. One of these procedures was known as trepanation, in which a hole would be drilled into the skull to release evil spirits. Thanks to Freud, people began to take psychology more seriously. Now let's take a closer look at how the reputation of psychology changed as time went on.
Over time, Freud shed light onto the world of psychology and proposed many interesting claims. One important contribution he brought was the concept that mental disorders are a treatable condition and should be taken with more precaution. Originally, Freud used to do hypnosis on his patients because that was the most practical at the time, but then he diminished this technique for a few reasons. One reason being is that he was not able to deepen the trance for his patients. In reality, this meant that hypnosis wasn't the proper way to help people with mental disorders and could have possibly done more harm than good. Freud thought that he wasn't capable enough to help people mentally and just wasn't a good hypnotist, but this was far from the truth. Since everyone lacked the proper knowledge, they all fell under the belief that hypnosis was the best method to perform on patients. Everyone thought that hypnosis was effective, but it was actually quite the opposite. Later, this way of helping patients was debunked, and a new treatment was open to the public. If Freud hadn't been so skeptical about hypnosis, there wouldn't have been any change. So, with his efforts, he was able to break this iceberg and create a new one of his own.
This iceberg would become his most famous theory to date, the thought of the unconscious mind and how parts of the mind, the id, ego, and superego work together to form personality. A developing personality is as fragile as a glass menagerie. They can shatter easily, making it hard to put back into pieces. Everything can affect you as a child, from memories to desires, even emotions. If a bad principle is ingrained in you, it can affect you for the rest of your life, which could result in developing a mental illness. Psychoanalysis is exactly this, the theory that if a child is not raised with a warm embrace, it could lead to the development of mental health issues. Freud's turning point of the talking curve was so groundbreaking because no one ever thought that the way a child was raised could affect you as a grown adult. What's even more phenomenal was the idea that talking could release this built-up trauma. Freud gave everyone the chance to let go of their pain, just like a balloon. This way of thinking served as future inspiration for many, such as Carl Jung. Carl Jung formulated the idea that individuation embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness. We could therefore translate individuation as coming to selfhood. Jung. This quote means that we can achieve self-actualization by ourselves rather than in a group. Furthermore, Anna Freud, daughter of Sigmund Freud, was also very much inspired by his ideas. She led the world in the study of child psychoanalysis. Her aim was to stop the issue at its root of its problems. These notions may seem logical, but were not backed by science, another common criticism of Sigmund Freud's theories. Now let's understand more behind that.
As Freud continued his work, he faced many criticisms along the way. People thought that psychoanalysis was not a part of real science, and that many of his statements were flawed, saying that it cannot be deemed as a subcategory because it is not predictable and can't be made accurate. One critic mentioned that childhood experiences, such as abuse or neglect, isn't reliable enough to say that's what only influences our personality and who we grow up to potentially become. Many people also stated that Sigmund Freud's theories were very close-minded, and that he only focused on how a child develops to conclude his observations. This of itself was an issue because this would mean that other factors that could possibly shape our behavior were diminished, one of the factors being culture. Much later, many psychologists looked over at Freud's work and saw the potential it had while not overlooking its flaws. These people were called the Neo-Freudians, which meant that they generally agreed with his ideas that child experiences do matter, while also focusing on other aspects of personality. This included the environment you grew up in and much more. These people, in a way, showed us how Freud's work could have made its way to being more sensible. Even though Freud faced judgment, his approach remained a valid option to help those in need and introduce therapeutic concepts.
The way Freud approached therapy offered his patients a personalized experience to accommodate them. He would emotionally and intellectually connect with them by offering something they needed, someone to listen to them. By listening to them, Freud would not only find the root of the issue but help his patients heal. He offered them chances to forgive themselves and those who have hurt them. Freud also invented psychotherapy. While both methods might seem the same, they are a bit different. Psychotherapy allows you to connect with your therapist on a deeper level. They then help you acknowledge what you need to prioritize in your life. The main focus of a psychoanalytic therapist is to help you understand where your issues stem from. Then you are told to make your own decision about how you want to feel about something. This suggests that depending on your situation, you might need your advice from someone or advice from yourself. With all that is said, how has Freud's turning point remained relevant throughout the years?
It is still used in modern times and is still prominent in psychology till now. Due to the popularity and slow acceptance of psychoanalysis, there have been many organizations, institutions, and conferences made around the globe reinforcing psychotherapy and its focus. It has served as a catalyst for many psychologists and professional therapists who were taught about Sigmund Freud in their universities. As his name travels from one person to the next, we begin to understand the lasting effects Freud left from his concepts of talk therapy, personality, and the human mind. These ideas have made striking new turns for psychology and in history. It has opened the world up to countless possibilities for psychologists and gave an outlook on how important it really is. This approach even inspired Neo-Freudians who did not wholeheartedly accept his actions, yet believed in him. Those like Anna Freud and Carl Jung are primary examples of how influential Sigmund Freud was and how his ideas spread. So, without further ado, we can give Sigmund Freud the title of the father of psychoanalysis.